Welcome into the Wilt Fong Whip Around. I'm JD Pakel in for Josh Newberg. Recruiting never sleeps. Another man who never sleeps is, of course, Steve Wiltfong. Steve, a lot of action right now on the recruiting trail. We got Oregon making some moves. Big weekend ahead. But first, though, you have the latest on the top quarterback in 2026 and where he stands currently off of a visit to Eugene. What's the latest there?
Yeah, good morning, JD. I talked with Jared Curtis's mother and other sources about his visit to Oregon earlier this week. They arrived in Eugene on Saturday and stayed Sunday, Monday, Tuesday before heading to Athens on Wednesday. Oregon continues to make Jared Curtis and his family feel at home. His mom talked about the fellowship they're building with the coaches and the staff. They learned more about the school and the program. Their relationship deepened with Oregon, and she said she walked away feeling good if Jared chose to go there. And I think that's the biggest factor here, right? I think coming into the visit, Jared, I like where Oregon stands with Jared, but getting his family comfortable with the idea of him going a couple time zones away to play his college football is big. They love offensive coordinator Will Stein, the offense, the way the quarterback has been lighting it up under center, just the energy around the Oregon program, just the excitement of conversations with Dan Lanning and Will Stein, the success that they've had on the field. I think those are all things that speak to Jared Curtis. And then certainly, Oregon is armed on the NIL front and can recruit a five-star quarterback with the best of them. But I think if you're Oregon, JD, you wanted to get this done before these visits because now he's at Georgia and he's got a long-standing relationship with Kirby Smart, Mike Bobo, Montgomery Van Gorder. They were one of the first programs to offer him. He's been to campus numerous times. He's been committed to Georgia. He's already been back there. He's been to Oregon 3 times now, I believe. He's been to Georgia at least double that. He's there for a few days this week. Out there on Wednesday, going to spend Thursday, Friday, and Saturday with Georgia. That's a lot of time for them to remind Jared why he loved Georgia the first time around. And we know his family loves Georgia. Proximity to home is better. I think that this is a cycle where we're seeing Georgia get more aggressive on the NIL front with some high school prospects like Jackson Cantwell, Jared Curtis. So we'll see how all that adds up coming out of these visits. I think in an ideal world, Jared Curtis would like to make his college decision following this visit to Georgia. He's been to Oregon several times. He's been to Georgia countless times. What more does he need to see? But if these visits continue to cloudy the picture and he doesn't know, he has official visits set to each program in June and could take it into the summer. But I think both programs would like to have him in the fold to help start recruit other blue chippers.
And so Oregon, we know how they operate. They're going to recruit all the way through the whistle. I remember last National Signing Day, you and I are sitting here in the studio, and it was just Hayes Fawcett-Baum after Hayes Fawcett-Baum after Steve Wiltfong intel. Like they were recruiting all the way through the end of the cycle. So I'm curious to see what they do if they do end up landing Jared Curtis and how they end up building the class around him. And speaking of that class now, big weekend ahead for the Ducks in Eugene. Sounds like some top guys are going to be on campus. What's the story there?
Yeah, Oregon's got the number 2 class in the country. They're kind of in a little bit of a back and forth with USC right now. And Oregon's hosting a few more of their top targets this week, a 5-star week in Eugene. The number 1 linebacker in the country, Tyler Atkinson's going to head out for the first time. He wanted to visit in January, but how the whole country basically got the flu bug. It hit everywhere. It hit Tyler Atkinson. He wasn't able to go out to Oregon, so he's excited to get to campus. Oregon is hosting Tyler Atkinson and Chris Henry Jr. this weekend. These are the first 2 recruits that I think I've heard of in the 2026 class. They both have been recruited for years. Dan Lanning was recruiting Tyler Atkinson when he was the defensive coordinator at Georgia, and he's wrapped up his 3rd year at Oregon as the head coach. So those 2 go way back. They've been FaceTiming. Dan Lanning went out to see him. Tosh Lupoy. The Ducks have been all over him. A lot of Georgia smoke around Tyler Atkinson. He's already visited Georgia 3 times this year. Including earlier this week. He was just at Clemson. He's got his Clemson official visit set. Auburn, Ohio State, they've been front runners for Tyler Atkinson. I expect Oregon to make a big move. I would be surprised if he doesn't ultimately take an official visit to Oregon. Again, he loves the staff, wants to get out there and see it. But this is a recruitment where I expect Oregon to make a move with Tyler Atkinson. And I would imagine we'll be talking about the Ducks and Tyler Atkinson the rest of the way. Chris Henry Jr., longtime commit to Ohio State, been committed since 2023. He was at Oregon in January. He's now coming back to Oregon this week to meet new receivers coach Ross Douglas in person. And then he's coming back for his official in the summer. Oregon has long been considered the biggest competition for Ohio State for Chris Henry Jr. Oregon has shown in the past that they can flip a receiver from Ohio State. They flipped Jeremiah McClellan, a top 100 recruit from St. Louis, during the early signing period 2 cycles ago. They want to do it again with Chris Henry Jr. And while many sources, and then Chris, say it's going to be tough to flip him from Ohio State because of the way Ohio State has their receivers prepared to be instant impact players in the NFL and then sustain that as being some of the best wide receivers in the NFL. That's what Oregon's up against, but he obviously loves the Ducks, and he's been building a good rapport with Ross Douglas, who before he was at Syracuse last year helping the Orange have the #1 offense, passing offense in college football. He was the receivers coach for the Patriots, so he's got some NFL pedigree to him. Chris Henry Jr. coming to campus this weekend. I think Oregon is trending for one of the best in Texas, JD. Jalen Lott, he's the number 10 receiver in the country per the On3 industry. He's from Panther Creek High in Lucas, Texas. He's coming off a great visit to LSU. The Tigers really showed him a lot. He's going to high jump and long jump at the school of his choice, but he's coming out this weekend. I think Oregon leads coming into the visit. So I like where the Ducks stand for Jalen Lott. We'll see how the visit goes this weekend. A few more key names to talk about. The number 4 linebacker in the country, Talanoa Illy, is back at Oregon. He was at Oregon in January. He was also at USC in February. There's been some USC smoke, but we know Oregon's in the top 2. He's got a keen eye on a few other programs like Oklahoma, UCLA, North Carolina. But Oregon, USC, battling for Talanoa Illy. He's back in Eugene. And Tom Topuai, he's committed to Oregon, but he's been to USC a couple times since that commitment. That's a war between those programs. And then the number 1 recruit in Washington, edge rusher Derek Coleman-Brusa. He was at Washington this past weekend for what was a monster recruiting weekend for the Huskies. Had a great time, but he's back at Oregon. He also likes Ohio State and some other programs. But Oregon's been the on-3 RPM favorite for Coleman-Brusa. They'll be happy to have him on campus this weekend. This, depending on where Oregon finishes at the end of the cycle, some of the guys on campus this weekend will have a lot to do with if Oregon finishes atop the on-3 recruiting rankings or not.
Steve, I want to go back to Chris Henry Jr. because you mentioned him, currently an Ohio State commit, has been for a long time. Big picture here, we spoke about it already. Oregon likes to do a lot of their work. It seems like here towards the end of the cycle. If I'm a Duck fan, how much patience should I have? How much should I be expecting us to go into the flip zone, whether it's Chris Henry Jr. or somewhere else? Is it something where we wait towards, like December-ish, or could we see some of that happen here earlier in the cycle?
Well, I think if you're an Oregon fan and you follow recruiting, you don't worry about anything anymore. You know that this staff can close at any time, spring, summer, fall, the end of the cycle. You know that Dan Lanning and his coaching staff, his off-field department led by Marshall Malchow, they got ace recruiters. They got ace NIL people. They have a great strategy. And it's a foundationally built on just meaningful relationships with top recruits. Look, these guys want to know that they're going to go to a place where they're going to get to play in the biggest games, get prepared to play at the highest level, and play for coaches that they have a relationship with. And then you add the NIL component. Oregon is a well-oiled machine on all those fronts. Yes, there might be a handful of recruits that are just going to take the biggest payday, but most of these recruits, they want a great relationship for a staff with a proven track record of development, a place that's going to play in the biggest games, and then that NIL component. Oregon's checking all the boxes. I'm never worried about their class, but it's number 2 in the country right now. And you see the visitor list this weekend. They're in all the right battles. And you know that during the summer and the fall, there's going to be guys, there's going to be blue chippers that we didn't even know Oregon was in the mix for, that they're going to visit campus later and they're going to be a team to watch. Watch what happens with Tyler Atkinson this weekend. I'd be surprised if Oregon doesn't make their way into this recruitment for the long run following his visit this weekend.
Dan Lanning and the Ducks continuing to recruit at an elite clip. Looks like right now, I know it's March, but looking like they are on track to lock up yet another top 10 class under Dan Lanning. So we got the big dogs out there in Eugene. Folks, make sure you are subscribed. Get all the latest here from the On 3 Recruits channel, all the intel from Steve Wiltfong, as well as Josh Newberg and the rest of the On 3 network. The Georgia Bulldogs, surprise, surprise, making some noise on the recruiting trail. Steve, they are currently in pursuit of getting a recommitment from the top quarterback in this cycle, Jared Curtis. What's the buzz right now as to where the Bulldogs stand in relation to Curtis?
Well, I think you're excited about your potential move that you can make this week with the number one quarterback in the country, 5-star from Nashville Christian, Jared Curtis, a one-time commit that wanted to reopen his process and continue to evaluate other programs, but continue to keep Georgia amongst his top programs. And it's been a bit of a back and forth behind the scenes with Georgia and Oregon. I think the Ducks have the momentum right now. But if you're Oregon, you're worried that he's about to spend 3 days in Athens because there was some buzz that maybe Oregon could have gotten him in the fold before these visits, but now he's out. He went to Oregon for 3 days with his family, had a phenomenal visit to Eugene, continues to feel very comfortable with offensive coordinator Will Stein, Dan Lanning, that offense, that program, where they're at, the trajectory, the type of players they recruit, the environment in Eugene. It was a great visit. The family loved it, but the family loves Georgia too. Look, Georgia was one of the first programs to offer him a scholarship. He's been visiting Athens for years. He's been to Oregon 3 times, I believe. He's been to Georgia countless times, including earlier this year. This is his second time visiting Georgia. Mike Bobo, Montgomery Van Gorder, Kirby Smart, great connections with the staff, the family, proximity to home. And look, this is a year where I think Georgia seems to be more in the NIL game with some top targets than what we've seen in previous cycles. And so they have a chance to check a lot of the boxes for Jared Curtis. He's going to take this visit to Georgia. He's going to be on campus into Saturday and then go home and evaluate things with his family and his agency and determine where he wants to go to college. And so Georgia's obviously led at various points. He was committed to the Bulldogs. The way that Georgia has recruited on the offensive line, wide receiver, tight end, running back, these are all things that Georgia is going to flex this weekend and trying to remind Jared Curtis why he would be most successful in Athens while doing it closer to home. And I think if you're Dan Lanning, Oregon and company, you feel good about your position, but you don't feel good about him spending 3 days at Georgia. And Dan Lanning, the former Georgia defensive coordinator, knows as well as anybody the way Kirby Smart and his staff can close recruits. And if you spend 3 days with Kirby Smart, he's really going to make you feel at home between the hedges.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody that's recruiting against Kirby Smart really sleeps all that soundly at night. But speaking of quarterbacks, Jaden O'Neal, the Oklahoma commit, was previously on campus in Athens. Where do things stand there, Steve?
Well, Georgia is really moving up the list for Jaden O'Neal. He's currently committed to Oklahoma, but that recruitment is on thin ice right now with the Sooners. Jaden O'Neal spent a couple days in Athens, him and his family, in Circle of Trust, and I'm told that they had a great visit and an official visit is in the works. Now, certainly, if Georgia lands Jared Curtis, we could see Jaden O'Neal pivot to Florida State or Arizona or some of these other programs. But right now, Georgia has momentum with Jaden O'Neal as well.
When you talk about the quarterback position for Mike Bobo and how they operate offensively, I mean, the past couple of years, they've thrown the football a lot. How crucial is it for Georgia to get one of these guys in the boat in your mind, Steve?
Well, I hate to say, I mean, look, you want to have your quarterback room stockpiled with talent, but I never want to say a recruit is make or break for a program like Georgia, the defending SEC champs, 2-time national champs under Kirby Smart. You just want to continue to have really talented players in your quarterback room. When Carson Beck went down last year, Gunnar Stockton gave him an admirable performance. And there's a lot of high expectations and excitement around Gunnar Stockton this year, his first year as a starter. But if Carson Beck doesn't go down, Georgia probably wins that game against Notre Dame. And they're playing against Ohio State for the national championship. So the quarterback room is so pivotal. And I think that, we've seen Georgia develop guys that were unheralded at the position and see them go on to be champions under center. Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi's in the program. A lot of excitement around Puglisi, but you want to keep getting competitive depth, guys that are pushing each other. High tides raise ships, and Jared Curtis is someone that wants to come in and play early at his next school of choice. Jaden O'Neal, someone that's coming off a really good junior season himself, that wants to come in there and compete right away. Those would be two really nice pickups for the Bulldogs here in this cycle.
You mentioned Georgia flexing some of that muscle here when it comes to the other positions they're recruiting. What else is going on Athens?
Well, the number one linebacker in the country, a familiar face, Tyler Atkinson, a state champion out of Loganville Grayson, was back at Georgia for a third time this calendar year on Tuesday for another practice. He was at one of Georgia's playoff practices in preparation for that Notre Dame game. That was right after he won his state championship. Him and Glenn Schumann, Georgia's defensive coordinator, they talk all the time. He also went to their junior day. He said it was good to sit in on meetings at Georgia, very detailed. He spent a lot of time with Coach Kirby Smart on the practice field. Imagine Georgia's spring practice. And I know that Kirby Smart is very vocal. He's coaching everybody. He's on the mic. He's running all over the place. Got Tyler Atkinson in his hip pocket explaining things about the defense, which Tyler Atkinson said some questions were answered. It was really good. He spent a lot of time with Coach Shu. He's been to spring practices at Clemson and Georgia. He's going out to Oregon this weekend. Auburn, Ohio State. Those are programs that have had buzz with Tyler Atkinson. Look, Tyler Atkinson is one of the most heralded athletes in this class. He was one of the first prospects to emerge nationally in the 2026 cycle. He's already got an Adidas deal. He's amped up. It's he's got to be one of the most profitable NIL athletes in this class. He's going to command a good NIL wage on the recruiting trail, but sort of what we talked about at the top of the show, he wants to be developed. He wants to be the best linebacker he can be in college football. Nobody's produced linebackers better than Georgia over the last 5-6 years. But Oregon, Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupoy, they got a great track record. Ohio State, James Laurinaitis, he was one of the best linebackers in college football. Did he win the Butkus Award? He might have won the Butkus Award, but he's an absolute stud that played at the highest level, that's recruiting him at Ohio State. The Buckeyes are defending national champs. There is a lot of competition for Tyler Atkinson right now, but Georgia continues to get him on campus. They're pushing all the right buttons for him. They're also pushing all the right buttons for on 300 athlete Ryan Mosley. He's one of the top two-way players in the state, defensive back, wide receiver. My on-3 RPM was already on Georgia prior to the visit. I love that pick even more. He had a great visit. Feels at home, said practice was electric. Energy between the players and coaches was crazy. That's another thing, JD. When you talk to recruits that go and visit Georgia for practice, it is physical. Paint chips are flying. Guys are getting after it. So much competition because when guys go to Georgia, they bet on themselves, and practice is their opportunity to earn their playing time on Saturdays. So it's a war in spring football. These recruits that are there, you're either built for it, you're made for it, or you're not. Ryan Mosley, Tyler Atkinson, they love it. That's the type of environment they want to be in college. Georgia is the heavy favorite for Ryan Mosley still coming out of his visit. Dre Quinn is an edge rusher from in-state, Greater Atlanta Christian, 4-star. We got Clemson last week, Georgia this week. He had a really good time with Coach Chidera Uzo-Doribe in the staff. Georgia's making a move with 2027 quarterback Jamison Purcell from Powerhouse Maine South in the Chicagoland. He had a fantastic visit. Georgia making moves this week. They have Calvin Russell, an on 300 receiver, on campus today. Syracuse, Miami, some of his favorites. But Georgia, they landed one of the best receiver classes in the country last year. They want to do it again this cycle under James Coley and company. That's kind of where that's another area where Georgia, they're shooting 68 on the course, but you got to shoot 66 every round to win the national championship. 67 receiver, where they want to be more consistent. Another big cycle for them at the position after hitting big in the portal and on the trail a year ago.
Yeah, one thing's for sure, Steve. I'm not even touching 60 anything if I'm ever out there on the golf course. But good to hear that Georgia is maintaining that national title standard as we expected for Kirby Smart on the recruiting trail. Georgia Bulldog fans, make sure you're subscribed. All the intel here, want y'all a part of it. Great stuff from Steve and Josh and everyone else part of the On3 team here. So make sure you are dialed in. The Bayou Bengals, LSU set up for a massive recruiting weekend here on deck. Steve Wiltfong, what is the latest out of Baton Rouge?
Well, LSU has the number one ranked recruiting class in the SEC, JD. It's number 3 in the land, and they are hot and heavy with some of their top targets in this 2026 cycle. Before we get into who visits this weekend, they hosted top 100 receiver Jalen Lott this past weekend. He absolutely loved his visit. I had him as a heavy trend to Oregon. He's visiting Oregon this weekend, and the Ducks could still have the edge. I think they do, but LSU closed that gap this past weekend with Jalen Lott. They need to survive the visit to Oregon this weekend, get them back to campus, but LSU making a move with the number 10 receiver in the country, Jalen Lott. They hope to make another move with the number 4 receiver in the on-3 industry, Booby Feaster out of DeSoto High. Earlier in the show, we talked about the emergence of Tyler Atkinson and Chris Henry Jr. in 2026 as the guys that kind of first went prominent nationally. Booby Feaster, reclass to 2026, was one of the first 2027s that got on my radar as a national recruit. 8th grade, came into DeSoto as a freshman, helped them win a state championship in big boy football in the Lone Star State, some of the best coaching and competition that you're going to find across the land. LSU has always been one of his favorites. He's been there numerous times. He's back on campus this weekend. Texas A&M's a major player. Alabama, he was just in Tuscaloosa. USC, certainly one of the fronters for him. But LSU, always been one of his favorites. He talked about the longevity of receivers that they produced years ago to now, from Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. He talked about OBJ. And so Cortez Hankton is a guy he likes being around, a coach that's going to keep it 100 with you at all times. He thinks he can get the right guidance to be the player he wants to be. LSU in a great spot for Feaster coming into the weekend. LSU didn't sign a quarterback in 2025, JD. Remember, that was big news on the trail. They had Bryce Underwood committed for quite some time, but Michigan and the NIL Brinks truck and all of that were able to get Bryce Underwood to stay home and be a Wolverine. That, I think, makes 2026 quarterback recruiting enticing for whoever they sign, because they get a gap year between the last signed quarterback in 2024 and them coming in 2026. The guy that they're going to try and make a move with this weekend is Bo Bentley. He's on 3's number 5 quarterback in the country, number 47 overall. He plays at Salina, Texas in the Lone Star State. He's a state champion. He's got dual threat capability, but he'll dice you up. He's very accurate with the football. Had a huge junior season, big riser, played in the Navy All-America Bowl. He's visiting LSU this weekend. He's been connecting with Joe Sloan. He loves the history of quarterbacks at LSU. I think LSU's got the put your Heisman money on Nussmeier coming into the season, get paid off big, another Texas arm. But he likes that. Oklahoma is the team to beat for Bo Bentley, but LSU looking to make a move this weekend. Florida State, Ohio State, Georgia Tech, Texas Tech, some of the others that he has a keen eye on. The highest ranked prospect on campus this weekend is going to be Tank Jones, 5-star edge rusher from Alabama. I like where the Tide stands for Tank, but he's always been high on LSU. Auburn's in there. A&M's definitely in there. Florida, Miami, Oregon, Vandy. But he's been to LSU in the past, has been to games in Death Valley, likes Coach Peoples and that coaching staff. Excited to get back to LSU. Some more names to keep an eye on this weekend. 4-star offensive lineman Zayden Krempin. Another Brian Kelly offensive lineman. Just got a huge payday in the NFL. Aaron Banks. If you know anything about Brian Kelly and his recruiting efforts and his football teams, they're always dominant up front. They always get the best out of their offensive linemen, and a lot of that goes to Brad Davis, the offensive line coach. But just over the course of Brian Kelly's career, offensive line play has been so pivotal. So many of these guys in the NFL, from Zach Martin to Quentin Nelson to Mike McGlinchey to Joe Alt, Ronnie Stanley, Aaron Banks is now making $77 million a year. You don't think they're going to point to that with guys like Zayden Krempin, who's visiting this weekend, coming off a great visit to Clemson? LSU's about to have a great NFL draft in April on the offensive line with the guys they got coming out. Zayden Krempin's excited to get to LSU. He talked about Brad Davis, what they've done with Will Campbell, Emory Jones, the guys of late. I don't know if he knows the history, but he's going to get a lesson this week in Baton Rouge of some of the offensive linemen that Brian Kelly's had his hands on. Hezzy Kent's an on 300 tight end. It's going to be on campus this weekend. Florida safety commit Devin Jackson's keeping a lot of schools warm. Jamarian Carlton's an interesting one. I was talking to Shay Dixon, the Bengal Tiger publisher, yesterday as he was putting together his best guest class. Kind of a collaborative effort with our guy Justin Wells at Inside Texas. My on 3 RPMs on Texas for Jamarian Carlton. They led when I put that pick in. Justin Wells is not anticipating Jamarian Carlton being a Longhorn for whatever reasons. He's the number 5 edge in the country. He's at LSU this weekend. He's got a top 6: A&M, Baylor, SMU, USC, Texas, and LSU. So I'm keeping a close eye on LSU as they always do so well in the Lone Star State. Tight end. Alex Atkins now on staff. Israel Briggs, they recently offered, number 7 tight end in the country. He'll be on campus this weekend. Ashari Charles is an edge rusher from Venice High that LSU is looking to make a move with. And then Mark Bowman. There's a big 7-on-7 in New Orleans, battle 7v7. A lot of blue chippers playing in that, so it's going to be a revolving door in Baton Rouge with teams coming through. Mark Bowman, someone that's expected. He was just at Alabama. He was just at USC. Georgia's one of his favorites, and Texas and Oregon round out the top 5. But since he reclassified, he's excited to see some other programs, and LSU's the one that's going to try and make a maneuver with Mark Bowman.
Steve, you and I were talking during National Signing Day, and we were speaking to the potential of what LSU could be on the field in 2025. We're seeing the quarterback back. They love the portal class, and Brian Kelly and that staff are in a great spot. It feels like they're a powder keg on the field. How much of that do you think could parlay into how this class finishes out when we get into the signing periods?
Well, LSU is always going to sign a great class. They have the resources to do it. They have a special atmosphere at night, may not be better in college football. And they have a great coaching staff of guys that like to recruit, from Joe Sloan, Brad Davis, Frank Wilson, Corey Raymond, Coach Baker, the new defensive coordinator. Those are guys that get after it on the trail. Second of all, they finally have some continuity. These coordinators are back for a second year. Coach Sloan will certainly have growth from last year to this year. Their starting quarterback, Nussmeier, is one of the most experienced guys under center in the country. They went into the portal, landed some difference makers at wide receiver. And then you have Coach Baker for a second year running that defense. I expect LSU to have continue to have tremendous growth on that side of the ball. They got to find a way to make Harold Perkins a difference maker. I thought at Notre Dame, they had a special player in Jalen Smith who won the Buckus Award. He won the Buckus Award as kind of like an eraser for Notre Dame. Harold Perkins can be a playmaker, keep teams behind the chains in the new age of college football. I hope that he flourishes for them this year. I couldn't believe when I was talking to Shay Dixon a few weeks ago. I'm not a big Vegas, I don't live on the gambling stuff every day, but that I have LSU as my dark horse national champion. We talked about that during the early signing period show, you and me and Newberg. They're at 8.5 in Vegas. You got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Put money on LSU to clear 8.5. And you don't have to go undefeated to make the playoff anymore. I think Nussmeier is going to have an epic season. I really think that you're going to see a big jump from last year to this year with him having all the experience that he now has, and what they've put around him in the running back room is terrific with Caden Durham and company, and they signed Harlem Berry and those guys. They had the best running back class in the country last year. I'm excited about LSU. To use one of my old colleagues, Barton Simmons' words, I'm bullish on LSU, which he probably hates now because he's at Vanderbilt. But the Tigers, man, momentum. And they're going to have an exciting weekend this weekend. I could see Boobie Feaster in their class, and we'll go from there.
And if they do end up making the playoff and competing for a national title like you and I think they both could, I would be fascinated to see where the Tigers finish when pen meets paper. LSU Tiger fans, get in the comment section. Let us know your expectations for this class when it comes time for National Signing Day. Tennessee and Josh Heupel off of their best class in the Heupel era, landing number 10 class in 2025. Looking to continue that momentum here in 2026. Big weekend out of Knoxville. What do you have for us, Steve, when it comes to what they're doing on the recruiting trail right now?
Well, Tennessee continues to recruit at a high level under Josh Heupel and this coaching staff. Top 10 class last year, including securing the signature of prized offensive tackle David Sanders Jr., who entertained Ohio State. at the end. They got the chops to go the distance with programs. They got the chops to win blue chip battles from prospects all over the country. And they had two of the nation's best in Knoxville yesterday. Edge rusher Luke Waffle, he's the number one ranked player in New Jersey out of Hun School. They're battling Penn State, Ohio State, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Texas, some of the others that he's having regular communication with. He visited Tennessee yesterday, said it was a great experience. Coach Heupel, Coach Gardner, his D-line staff are just genuine people, great coaches. He said he's lucky to build relationships with them. Coach Gardner, he's been coaching SEC defensive linemen for longer than I've been in the business. He is a legend in the space, in the conference, the guys that he's been around, the guys he's helped develop. It all speaks to Luke Waffle coming out of this visit. Tennessee moved the needle. They certainly did with the number 2 interior offensive lineman in the country, Darius Gray. They would love to inject him into this program. Tennessee's really gotten tougher and more physical since Heupel and company have been there. Under Coach Tim Banks, they went from a powder puff Swiss cheese defense to one of the most stout defenses in the country. He's become one of the best assistant coaches in college football. And then on the offensive line with Coach Ellerby, Coach Heupel, it's always going to be an exciting product. Darius Gray said, what a time at Tennessee today. Loved every part of it. Can't wait to be back real soon. Had an amazing time there. The family atmosphere was the biggest thing that stood out to him and his family. He really enjoyed watching Coach Ellerby coach that offensive line. The patience he had, the way he was able to help guys work through mistakes, get it ripping and roaring on the next rep. He said the visit was absolutely great. He loved it. Clemson's been on the rise with him. South Carolina's always been one of his favorites. Michigan, LSU, some of the others Tennessee's going to battle there. And then they hosted edge rusher Keyshawn Eliezer from Raleigh, North Carolina, Southeast Raleigh. Tennessee offered in February. Didn't take long for him to get to campus. Said that UT has showed they can develop people for life and the NFL. He's got a frame that'll remind of James Pierce. He compares himself to James Pierce. Loves the way that they've developed James Pierce. And so that was something else that resonated with him. So Tennessee, they have their quarterback committed, Faison Brandon. He's locked in, and now they want to build around it. Nation's number 9 class. These are guys that can help them solidify another top 10 haul in 2026.
Steve, you mentioned the quarterback being committed. It feels like that's always going to be the case. As long as Josh Heupel is your head coach, you feel good about the offensive weapons, you feel good about the quarterback, but during your intel just there, you mentioned a lot of guys that put their hand in the dirt on the offensive and defensive side. Has that been a priority for this staff on the recruiting trail here as they've evolved under the Heupel era in Knoxville?
Look, from the moment that they got on campus, they were winning recruiting battles against the teams that they had to beat in the SEC on Saturdays to land guys in their front 7. And I think we've seen the program evolve because of that. You're not going to outsmart Kirby Smart, Nick Saban at the time, and some of these top-notch coaches with just these mining for talent recruiting wins. You need to be able to go toe-to-toe and go into Georgia and go into Florida and win pivotal recruiting battles for key players in the front 7. And we've seen Tennessee do that, and now they're winning games on the field because of it. And they're in some monster battles moving forward. You talk about running back Savion Hyder. He's the number 1 running back in the country. He's got Tennessee on his short list. Rodney Dunham, he's a top 10 defensive end in the land from Charlotte. Tennessee's already had him on campus a bunch. They're going to be in that one to the end. So Tennessee recruiting at a high level, a lot of big names. They're going to be a fun team to follow throughout the rest of the season.
Vols fans, Steve's telling you now that the program's continuing to evolve. Make sure you're subscribed here and let us know in the comment section what you want to see out of this 2026 cycle. Now, Steve, the weather is always good in Los Angeles, but the recruiting right now might arguably be even better when you talk about what's going on at USC. The number 1 class right now in 2026. They've been on fire. Who could be next for the Trojans?
Well, let's talk about the big week that they just had, though. They just landed 4-star offensive lineman Usun Tafa out of Corner Canyon in Utah. They beat Washington, Utah, and Texas A&M, among others for him. 6'5", 290 pounds. Offensive line remains a point of emphasis for the Trojans. I think that's really where we've seen Lincoln Riley and company improved this program. And I think it's going to really show its head this fall around the point of attack, where they have a really good season up front and they want to keep it rolling for years to come. They go out and land Tafa to add to the class. And then they also added coveted four-star receiver Trent Mosley. They beat Notre Dame, Stanford, among others, for the Santa Margarita Catholic four-star wideout. They want more playmakers on the perimeter. Trent Mosley was a top target for them. It was a huge week for them as they add to the number one recruiting class in the country. They're trending for a couple more in the near future, in my opinion. I logged an on-3 RPM during the fall for four-star running back Deshaun Rideau out of Oaks Christian. I love that pick even more for the Trojans as he continues through his process. And a name that we need to talk about more with USC, JD, is the nation's number 7 defensive lineman, number 73 prospect overall in the on-3 rankings, Jamian Winfield out of Richardson, Texas. He's got a great relationship with Coach Eric Henderson and the staff. Lincoln Riley's always done a good job recruiting the Lone Star State. I got USC in the driver's seat for Jamian Winfield right now in his process. Some other guys that USC's battling for, Cody Green, the number 3 offensive tackle in the land. He's the number 9 prospect overall. He's the number 1 recruit in California. He's also committed to Oregon. He's going to take an official visit to USC on June 20th. I imagine he'll be there some other times as well. He talked about this 26 class helping USC compete for a national championship, and it would be amazing to be part of that. He talked about saying there's quite a bit of excitement around his teammates, how aggressive USC is recruiting California, and how much of a priority Matter Day is again. So things are picking up with Cody Green, who's also considering Texas. He is an elite point of attack player that USC is after. Talanoa Illy's a 4-star linebacker that's been a slobber knocker with Oregon on the trail. He's at Oregon this week, but USC, there's been some good buzz there. And then Davon Benjamin, he's the number 2 corner in the country. He visited USC last week. My on-3 RPM's on Oregon, but a source that spent time with him said things are moving in the right direction with the Trojans for Davon Benjamin.
Now, Steve, you mentioned a lot of names there that are from the state of California. When I look at this class right now, over half of these guys that are committed are from not just California, but Southern California. Is there a different buzz in your mind around that part of the state when it comes to how they perceive USC currently?
Well, I think a lot of these coaches that are on staff are going into their second year. You know, he really revamped his defensive staff. Lost his linebackers coach, Coach Entz, who is as good an assistant coach as anyone could have in the country. He's now the head coach at Fresno State. But he replaced him with Rex Ryan, who's Sincere Johnson, a 4-star linebacker from Ohio. He said he just calls Coach Ryan Rockstar because of his hair. But Sincere's going to take an official visit to USC this summer. USC's not the leader by any stretch, but they're in all the right recruiting battles because they're not afraid to go toe-to-toe for any prospect, no matter where they are, from coast to coast, whether that's Sincere Johnson or Messiah Hampton, an electric receiver from New York. You know, certainly Brandon Arrington's a priority, the number 1 corner per the on-3 industry rankings. He's got his official visit locked in. Mark Bowman, the number 2 tight end in the country, they're battling for him from in-state, from Matter Day. So they're in on a lot of elite guys. They got some evaluation guys high on their board. Elbert Hill is a corner from Ohio that I have them in the top 2 or 3 for right now in his process. The number 1 recruit out of the state of Ohio per the on-3 industry. So it's the excitement around the staff, having some momentum at the end of the year, winning your bowl game, some continuity amongst these coaches now going into the next season, and then Lincoln Riley's track record. I get annoyed when people act like Lincoln Riley's not one of the better coaches in college football. He only went to 3 playoff games at Oklahoma. His first year at USC, they damn near made the college football playoff when there was only 4 teams. If Caleb Williams doesn't get injured in that Utah game, where he still had a valiant effort and played hurt, they probably beat the Utes. The 2 Utes. I love my cousin Vinny references. But they probably beat Utah, and they're in the college football playoff for a 4th time. Now, I get it, man. If my aunt had, you know what, she'd be my uncle. So I get the ifs. But I'm just saying, my point is that USC has played meaningful football under Lincoln Riley as well, and I think they're on the verge of doing it again. And he's had a hell of a run as a head football coach, and there's a lot of momentum around the Trojans. He's put together a great staff. Defensive coordinator Deonton Lynn's as respected as they come. Coach Eric Henderson's as respected as they come. And Coach Belk and Coach Henson on the offensive line, and they just got Dennis Simmons and the receivers. Look, they got a great staff. Coach Riley does a great job recruiting. They got their NIL in order. They just hired Chad Bowden as their GM. He is as influential with recruits as anyone in his position. I mean, he is talking to their top recruits about why they should come. He has so much energy and gets these kids fired up, in addition to their relationships with on-field staff. So USC's humming. They got the #1 class in the country. They're in on all the right recruiting battles, and they're going to be fun to follow in the spring and summer. And that will do it for today's episode of the Wilt Farm Whip Around. Thanks for tuning in. Please hit like and subscribe to the On3 Recruiting channel, and we will be back on Monday to recap some of these big recruiting weekends that happened. And I'll be at Overtime OT7, so we'll recap that as well. Have a great weekend.